Welcome to the Cannabis Innovators Show. My name is Michelle Holliday. Today we are honored to have with us Mr. Roger Goodman. Roger is a Washington state-based attorney, a legislator, and a Washington state representative in the Washington House of Representatives. Roger, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Good to be with you.
How exciting is the marijuana legislation in California coming into effect on January 1st, 2018? This has to be a great motivator for other states.
It is. We were waiting for California to end cannabis prohibition. It almost happened a few years ago, but the ballot initiative didn't quite pass. That was an interesting dynamic. But, California is the sixth largest economy in the world. And so where California goes, so does the world. And I'm up here in Washington state, and we ended prohibition and created a regulated market in cannabis back in 2012. Washington and Colorado are the first jurisdictions in the world to do that. So we kind of, leveled the shot heard around the world, but California really is the big one. And so for sure, we're way beyond the tipping point now. We're not going back to prohibition. We're going to have regulated markets probably in most states, within the next, I'd say, certainly within the next 10 years. But and some states will be stupid and continue to prohibit it and, arrest people and all that. But I think California certainly was the final blow to the war on drugs.
Now, you have been a strong advocate for the legalization for a long time. What brought you to that mindset?
Yeah, well, I was a state bureaucrat. Actually, I was the director of the Criminal Sentencing Commission here in Washington State. We established the punishments for felony crimes, and I saw that we were locking up people using drugs for very long periods of time, and not really locking up like child molesters and people who assault others and so forth. For longer than that. So it was the whole sentencing system was out of whack. And I just woke up to the injustice and irrationality of the war on drugs. And instead of going back into law practice after being at the Sentencing Commission, I worked here in Washington with some funding from some of the high-tech businesses like Microsoft and started a drug policy reform project through the Bar Association and Medical Association. It was a professional voice to end the war on drugs. And the messenger was important. Everyone kind of knew intuitively that the war on drugs was a disaster, but it was the wrong messenger. And so with the Bar Association and Medical Association speaking up, the legislature here listened and started to, first of all, not lock people up, but give them treatment, and that's for the serious drug problems. And then eventually, it really only took a few years, took a look at the drugs themselves. We're now actually providing heroin maintenance and safe consumption spaces for heroin use in Seattle. So we're moving beyond marijuana, but marijuana clearly is the most widely used substance, and it just made sense to the voters to end prohibition and create a regulated market. And so within less than 10 years, we did that. We voted for it in a ballot initiative in 2012. So I sort of laid the groundwork for marijuana legalization here in Washington State. It's very gratifying to see. It's all good news. We've had reduced police expenditures, reduced harm on the roadways, reduced exposure and use by children. We can go into all those details, but it's all very good news.
Wow. Yes, please do. It sounds like Washington is an extremely progressive state.
We are. We sort of, we're usually the first or second in whatever it is. As a matter of fact, the same year, the very same election, same day that we voted to end marijuana prohibition was the same day that we voted to legalize same-sex marriage. And so some people call us the Soviet Socialist Republic of Washington up here, but it's a great place to live. We have a booming economy and a great climate and a very progressive social and cultural environment.
Now, Washington State being on the other side of the country from Washington, D.C., I know you're located in Seattle. I understand D.C. itself has already legalized.
It's a little bit of a different model. They don't have outlets to obtain marijuana. There are different ways to go about ending prohibition. And one is you just say you decriminalize it, which actually still could call for civil punishments, not criminal punishments. That's sort of the first step. And then the second step is to end punishments altogether, which we call depenalization. And that's what they've done in Washington, D.C. And they did that by a ballot initiative, a referendum as well. But there's no place to go get it. So there's no regulated commercial market. But so that's the final step, and it's what we've done in Washington and in Colorado, and then now also in Oregon, and of course California is coming online, Nevada, and Massachusetts recently also voted to, and Maine as well, have created not just eliminating punishment, but creating the regulated market and commercial outlets for the product.
How are the approval ratings and surveys of Americans in favor of medical and recreational use increasing? We understand that people from all states, including conservative ones, are mostly in favor now, at least, of medical use.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Medical, the polling for allowing people to use cannabis medically is in the 80s. I mean, it's overwhelming. People don't want others to suffer. And a number of people found that the harsh pharmaceuticals they were taking were actually killing them. And when they substituted marijuana or cannabis, it really helped to ease their suffering and reduce symptoms and for a wide range of medical disorders. And so 80+% of Americans support medical use of marijuana, including, as you say, in the conservative states. Here now in Washington state, I just saw the numbers last week. 78% of Washington state residents believe that we should have a fully regulated commercial market for general adult use, not just medical. That's a testament to the fact that since we've now had a regulated market for 4 years, it's a success, and people are seeing that it's working, and that the craziness of the war on drugs is luckily behind us, and people don't support that anymore.
Now, business-wise, it looks like the place to be right now is in the ancillary businesses, the ones that do not touch the plant, and they seem to have far less regulatory hurdles. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that really is. I am an attorney representing marijuana businesses here, so I'm sort of playing many different roles. I'm in the state legislature helping to regulate the industry, and I'm also an attorney off-season representing cannabis businesses, and it is a very highly regulated environment, very costly for marijuana businesses to comply with the regulations, and it's also very competitive between the businesses. And remember, this is a plant, so this is an agricultural product, so there's all sorts of risks in terms of crop failures and mold and insects and so forth. It's not just making plastic widgets. And so it is a highly speculative, highly risky business. The reason that we have these very strict regulations is because of federal oversight. The U.S. Government still strictly prohibits marijuana for any purpose whatsoever, but has issued guidance to the states so that it's a political reality. They acknowledge that if they were to try to prohibit it in our states, there would be a terrible backlash. So they're allowing this. It's called the green light policy. They're allowing this to proceed, but with very strict limits, and that is costing the businesses a lot. So the ancillary businesses, everything from like myself as a lawyer, or the accountants, the construction industry, building buildings and building, farms and so forth, and then all of the other materials, lights and soil, and there's a lot of infrastructure involved. Graphic design in order to build websites, which is very important to gain attention for your product. The ancillary businesses are thriving, and there are tens of thousands of jobs being created. Not necessarily high-skilled jobs. As I said, lawyers and accountants for sure, but I know that in Colorado and in Washington there are carpenters and electricians and so forth who are just waiting for the next marijuana business to hire them to construct a new facility and that sort of thing.
That's great. Now, who are the people making the money at this point in the cycle? How much does a entry-level job pay? And is it a viable career change for people to consider?
I think it is. When you go to the marijuana shops here in Washington, we have almost 500 of them. They are very happy with their jobs, and I am assuming they make a fairly good living. I mean, again, those are I'd say relatively unskilled positions. You're basically a retail clerk, but there are definitely job opportunities, and also employment helping with the growing and processing of the plant. As I say, there are tens of thousands of jobs, new jobs being created in this state and in each other state. So I don't know about the level of pay. I mean, I think, as I said, these are not highly skilled positions. But for someone who, maybe just out of college or doesn't have maybe a lot of higher education, it actually is quite an opportunity if you can get a job like that. It's pretty competitive to get them.
Now, as a legislator, you know the lobbyist groups. So the question here is, what does big pharma, big tobacco, and big liquor have to say about the legalization of marijuana?
It's very interesting. Particularly the pharmaceutical industry, before the war on drugs started to wind down, the pharmaceutical industry was funding the various organizations out there, like Partnership for a Drug-Free America and Drug-Free America Foundation. And so it's kind of the irony that the pharmaceutical and the liquor industry were funding the Drug-Free America Foundation. But they saw the economic threat, particularly pharmaceutical industry, and did not want cannabis or marijuana to become legally regulated. Now, they're just kind of like the federal government. The pharmaceutical industry is just quietly acquiescing. They're just acknowledging that public sentiment is very much in favor of creating a regulated market for marijuana rather than prohibiting it and punishing people, which was terribly counterproductive. There's no organized opposition to this. My friends in the lobbying community, in the legislature, who are work for the pharmaceutical industry, are probably cannabis users themselves.
Really?
I mean, that's another very interesting cultural phenomenon that adults, people in my age, 40s, 50s, are just coming out of the closet and acknowledging that they've been using marijuana for years. So the culture has rapidly shifted, and I do believe that use of marijuana has reduced the use of pharmaceuticals. And also we see in the states where marijuana is legal, we have less opiate addiction and opiate overdose problems. So people are using, used to call marijuana the gateway drug. Marijuana is actually the exit drug. It really helps people get off of other drugs, and it's a harm reduction alternative.
That's just incredible. I know there are a lot now of ex-NFL players who, now that their career is over, they feel free to say, hey, cannabis needs to be a viable alternative to the opioids. And
absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. It's amazing how many are coming out at this point in time. Are you impressed with that?
Yeah, again, this is a time now as the war on drugs is winding down for people to stop living a lie. It's stressful for people to use a substance that doesn't harm anybody else, and if it harms them, maybe from excessive use, it's maybe eating too many bags of chips, or falling asleep too early. But in general, it really is beneficial as a medical need, and in the NBA in particular, I know that many of the basketball players use it in the off time, and it's unfortunate that they still can't acknowledge that they use it, but we're getting there.
Why has Canada been able to move so much faster than the United States?
Well, in Canada, they have a national law that allows for for growing medical marijuana. It's been in place for a few years already, and so the government of Canada, the federal government of Canada, and Canada has always been more progressive than the United States in many different ways. So in Canada, they're already growing large plantations of medical grade cannabis for use by patients. But now, with Justin Trudeau, the new prime minister, we have a very enlightened, progressive leader, and the Liberal Party is in power and rapidly moving to, effect these types of progressive policy changes. So I think it's really, again, we're beyond the tipping point. The voters voted for Trudeau and his party, and there's less drug war hysteria. Frankly, less drug war hysteria in every other country, with the exception of the East Asian countries and the Middle Eastern, the Arab countries. They still execute people for drugs and so forth. We have a terrible situation in the Philippines right now where thousands of people are being executed summarily without any due process just for being drug users. That's an awful situation. But generally in Europe and the sort of first world countries, it's nothing like the United States where we have this very reactionary policy, or had. It's eroding now.
Now, how much money are we saving, or could we save, by not arresting and incarcerating weed users? How beneficial could this be?
Oh, that's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, we've spent $1 trillion on the war on drugs since its inception. At least $1 trillion. $1 trillion.
Wow.
Richard Nixon kind of ramped it up back in the early 70s, and then it really got going in the mid to late 80s under Reagan and the first Bush. And 80% of it or more was about marijuana. And I know that we calculated here in Washington State, the reduction in police expenditures for arrests is about $15 million a year. We had already kind of had a de facto, we had medical marijuana ever since 1998, so we had a de facto legal use of marijuana by adults for quite a while, and so there really was not a lot of arrests and prosecution and incarceration, even for the last 20 years. But still, we're saving, as I said, $15 million a year just in our state, which never really had a high arrest and prosecution and incarceration rate. But think of California and all of the other states around the country. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of savings, and then allowing police to do real public safety work. Cannabis, I know that we have what we call Hemp Fest in Seattle every summer. The 25th Hemp Fest is happening this year with 150,000 people in the same place using marijuana. And the police love that assignment because there's nothing ever happens. What they hate is Mardi Gras, where people are drinking and, killing each other. Mm-hmm. And so marijuana is just widely acknowledged, including by law enforcement, not really to cause a lot of harm. We have seen a significant decline in impaired driving in DUI cases because people who are using marijuana tend not to drive. They acknowledge how they feel and they don't drive. Instead of alcohol, where you think you can do anything, and then you go drive and kill somebody. And so we've actually seen a dramatic reduction in alcohol-related deaths on the roadways because people have substituted away from alcohol and they're using marijuana instead.
Now that brings me to my next question. What are the positive effects of the youth in legal states? Is there a noticeable change for the better?
Yes, I would say the positive effects of ending marijuana prohibition and creating a regulated market are threefold. First, children. Second, public safety in general. And third, revenue and budgets. As far as children, we see here in Washington State a reduction in the use of marijuana by 8th graders. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon. Sort of the forbidden fruit isn't forbidden anymore. Grandma's using it for cancer, so it's not cool. And so 8th graders are less tempted by it because it's sort of been normalized in society. So 8th grade use is down. 10th and 12th graders, that's the measurements are 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. So 10th and 12th graders in high school, there has been no increased use of marijuana. This is all self-reporting, and so it's actually probably it's quite accurate. So we're seeing again no increased use by young people. And then as far as public safety, as I said, we have reduced DUIs on the roadways. And then in terms of our budgets, we're bringing in about $1 billion a year in Washington State in tax revenue from the sale of the product.
Wow.
That helps our budget.
Oh, yeah. And once that starts, the possibility of this reversing itself it becomes zero, right?
And that's the thing. You see, some of these conservative states who don't like marijuana think that it kills children. And in fact, we have conservative legislators here who I serve with in the legislature from the other part of the state that's not Seattle, it's the rural part of the state. And they don't like this stuff. They think it kills children, but then they see the revenue. And they're quite willing to accept the revenue and have it substitute for other taxes. They generally don't like to raise taxes. And so there's somewhat of I guess I should say, hypocrisy. And so these states that don't particularly want to see marijuana sold and used will be tempted by the significant tax revenue that will help balance their budgets. So I think we're going to see some states coming online just for that purpose alone.
And that's very comforting to people who need marijuana. I mean, you touched on two things. For the youth, it sort of takes out the coolness. If grandma's using marijuana for her ailments, then the cool factor just really doesn't. It's not right there for the 12-year-old once they see that. But the other thing is, it is the risk of this being taken away by people who have become dependent on it. It may not save their life, but what it will do is make the rest of their life much, much more comfortable and happy if they have a terminal illness.
I've met quite a number of people who said they would be dead today if they didn't have marijuana available to them for medical purposes. I've met dozens and dozens of people who have moved away from other states to live here in Washington State because of, and this was when it was only medical use, for multiple sclerosis, for Crohn's disease, for Parkinson's, for a wide range of chronic disorders. They moved here just for that purpose, literally to save their lives. Now we have this threat on the federal level. We're hearing from the U.S. Justice Department, the Attorney General, he's going to start cracking down again. That's all talk. I can tell you that privately, the Justice Department has told us in the states where we already have a legalized market that they don't have the resources. It's not their priority. It's just rhetoric coming from this current administration. But people are still worried that their medical availability is going to be reduced, and so that's still a concern.
Well, that's wonderful to hear and very comforting to know that it is going forward slowly, but it's safely going forward.
Well, I do have to say that there is, because the market in marijuana during Prohibition was an unregulated market. There were some, terrible, byproducts. It was a black market, and there was not a lot of violence, but there were criminal enterprises involved, and so that we have largely eliminated just by having regulated production and sale at a reasonable price. But many of the medical users were getting it for free in large amounts, and now it's much more difficult. And so the medical users, who sometimes they have to use a lot, have to pay for it. And so there are some patients, quite a number, who are suffering because they can't afford to purchase at the store the amount that they need. And so I'm actually somewhat concerned about that and seeking to legislate some exceptions for the medical users in large amounts so that they don't have to suffer.
Could you expound a little bit about that? How can you balance that out as this goes forward for people that might actually be afraid that prices will now go up for them?
Yeah, well, we have taxes. We have the price of the product, as I said, is still reasonable. It's at or below the black market price. And so there's still some black market activity. but most of it is through the stores. Say 75 or more percent of the sales is through the regulated market now, which is very encouraging. In a 4 or 5 year period, we really undercut the black market. So California marijuana is not being imported in vast quantities up here. It's Washington state grown, Washington state sold, which is actually part of our requirement. It has to be all within the state. But the medical users were able to grow themselves, and we don't have a grow your own law. So you're not allowed to grow your own. In Colorado you are, and in many of the other states you are, Oregon. So that's one thing we need to do here in Washington, is to allow people to grow their own in relatively small amounts, but for their own use. The law enforcement's a little worried about that because they think it would get out of control. I disagree. Because most people, it's a hassle to grow it yourself. You just go to the store and buy it now. But the taxes, so the price is not unreasonable, and yet the taxes are significant. Our tax is 37%, so it's another third on top of that. And we don't provide a tax break to medical patients. So we're a little bit too hungry for the revenue, actually, as we try to balance the budget. And I believe that we should provide a tax break to patients, which would give them considerable relief in paying for it. But then there are people who are of very limited means, and they can't afford to buy it even without the taxes. And so we're needing to create a few more models of medical cooperatives or other group grows that are still regulated, but allowing medical patients to get access to the amounts that they need.
That's wonderful. Now, you touched on something of interest. In order for it to be legal and regulated in Washington, that state, it has to be actually grown in Washington state.
Yes, and that's true of all of the states that have legalized. So the West Coast now, and Nevada, and then Massachusetts and Maine. The federal oversight requires this, that we have intra-state, not interstate, but intra-state production and sale. So, for instance, here in Washington, you cannot be an out-of-state owner. You have to be a Washington state resident in order to participate in the business. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be a Washington state resident to purchase at the store, but you can't make any money on a Washington state marijuana business if you are an out-of-state resident. This is one of the main concerns of the federal government is interstate diversion, so that we have a regulated market in Washington, but maybe it starts to go across the border into Idaho and Montana. And so, although I think Montana is going to legalize fairly soon as well. Idaho is going to be stuck there in the middle of all of these states, and Wyoming, I guess. Like I said, go ahead, waste your time and money arresting people, which they are, by the way. In Idaho, the border counties the law enforcement are just waiting there for people to drive across the border from Washington to arrest them. Same thing in Nebraska and in Kansas. People driving out of Colorado need to be very careful driving across the border into Kansas and Nebraska, because the law enforcement is just sitting there waiting.
Wow.
To arrest.
That is very interesting.
Yeah, the arrest rates are skyrocketing in the border counties of the adjacent states to the legalized states. So people need to be very careful.
Wow. So you can't have a huge farm in Kansas and sell it to California.
Exactly. And I think now with California having legalized, and Oregon and Washington already having a regulated market up and running. So California legalized, was taking time for them to put the regulations in place, which is happening right now, so that, you have to issue licenses, and there's all sorts of, it's a government oversight of an industry. So it takes a little time to set up. But once it is set up in California next year, we'll have the entire West Coast of the United States as a legal market. And it could be that we integrate it in some way, but we have to be sort of careful of federal oversight. And I think by 2020, by the next presidential election, the issue of marijuana legalization will become an issue in the presidential election. And whoever is running for president, I think, would be very wise to say that we should legalize marijuana, and they will win the presidency. Then we don't have to have these artificial borders between the states. So we'll have interstate commerce at that point. And I do have to say that here up in Washington, we're worried about California just taking over the market. California produces 95% of our vegetables in this country. California produces everything, right? And high tech. I mean, we have some great high tech up here in Washington, and we actually have some great vegetables too. But the scale, the economy of scale in California is so enormous that it's really hard to compete. So the cannabis market up here in Washington could be threatened by the power of the California market.
Oh, that is very interesting.
Yeah. For the moment, we like keeping the wall up, so we have an intrastate market.
It's got its own benefits for the moment.
Well, as an attorney working for cannabis businesses, they want to expand to California, and through trademark. And right now they can't open up a business there. But again, once the wall comes down with federal prohibition ending, then it will be truly interstate commerce, as with other products.
Roger, this has been an amazing interview. How can people contact you?
Well, I guess I'll give my two identities. I'm a state legislator, and so my email is Roger, Roger.Goodman, Goodman, Roger.Goodman, at leg.wa.gov. So that's leg.wa.gov, leg.wa.gov. And then my law firm is called Gleam Law, which is Gleam, gleam in your eye, Gleam Law. So that's GLEAMLAW, gleamlaw.com. And you can email me at roger@gleamlaw.com. And if you're interested in the legal side of the business. But look forward to hearing from people.
Roger, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. This has been terrific.
Roger Goodman, Washington State Attorney and Legislator, member of the Washington House of Representatives. For the Cannabis Innovators Show, I'm Michelle Holliday at PortfolioWealthGlobal.com. Today's show has introduced us to one of our public officials who is truly committed to helping people. Washington State Representative Roger Goodman has been working tirelessly to push forward the legislation of marijuana within the United States. Roger is excited, as are we, about the cannabis legalization in California. In fact, Tom Beck, founder of Portfolio Wealth Global, is already working on due diligence for several private companies which are about to IPO in the California market. Through our newsletter, we will email you our top stock suggestion pick in this sector. So be certain that you have subscribed to our free Global Wealth newsletter. Representative Goodman really described how successful the regulated market is becoming, with far less policing, a more relaxed judicial system, a better social and cultural environment, and far less punishment, which citizens truly appreciate. In regard to medicine, it is becoming more and more apparent that cannabis far outweighs the pharmaceutical options in the market today. As Roger pointed out, the war on drugs has become a huge waste of taxpayer money. This is clearing the way for much more useful programs. Canada has been progressing as well, and Tom is flying to Vancouver this summer to meet with marijuana leadership and entrepreneurs. He will be covering more companies for you in our upcoming newsletters. Tom is looking for another huge winner, just like last year's 1,236% gain in the cannabis stock which he profiled. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you again next time for the Cannabis Innovators Show. Until then, I'm Michelle Holliday on PortfolioWealthGlobal.com.